Muggsy and their damn good-looking and insanely comfortable menswear are visiting from Chicago with a limited-time pop-up right here in Georgetown at 3112 M Street Northwest. All of their jeans, pants, tops, and jackets are what they call straunchy. That means they're soft, stretchy, and strong, and they look damn good too. Plus, when you stop by, you'll get a free styling, and there's going to be free drinks and games. It's going to be a vibe. Check out the pop-up at 3112 M Street Northwest. It's open now 11 through 7 Mondays through Saturdays and 11 through 6 on Sundays. See you there.
Today on CityCast DC, we're talking about whether DC is in for a tax hike. We're talking about what's missing in some of the Trump administration's park makeovers. And we will try to read the tea leaves about where DC candidates are planning their election night parties. Plus, in a members-only fourth segment, we'll get into the proposal to bring a giant homeless shelter to the HUD building. I'm here with WAMU's Alex Coma and CityCast's Emma Uber. Today is Friday, June 12th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Alex.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Oh, same here.
Hey, Emma.
Hello.
Emma and I are like on Zoom calls like half the day anyway. So
It's true.
But it's still good to see you, Emma. Both of you guys, I think, were down at the Wilson Building watching the budget sessions of DC Council come together. And let me just set the stage because I think a lot of listeners hear budget and like reach for the mute button. But, you know, the city has a lot less money coming in than it used to because a lot of us have lost jobs and the local economy has really been turned around as a result of the federal cutbacks. So the mayor proposed a pretty tight budget that cut a bunch of stuff. And the council that doesn't want to, like no politicians want to cut stuff, is talking about restoring that and maybe whether they should do taxes do new taxes to make that possible, since they got to balance the budget. What was your guys' big takeaways from the session you saw?
Yeah, I guess the way to think about this is this was just sort of one big punt, right? You know, they were able to solve most of the most immediate challenges, like the biggest programs that people cared the most about, for the most part. They were able to avoid cutting. So think about the programs for childcare that we've been talking about on this show for a very long time. They were able to restore funding for it for a year. They were able to largely restore paid leave funding for a year, partially, a little bit going forward, right? So this is all relying on money that is mostly one time. This is one big saying, next mayor, you figure it out, because we don't want to do too much now.
The current mayor, Muriel Bowser, said was like, we've got to, we need to do these really unpleasant things because otherwise our budget will be out of balance and we are obliged to have it be balanced. My understanding is they sort of were like, well, let's just use our rainy day fund for this. And there's a lot of people, including the chief financial officer who has to sign off on budgets, who said, like, do not do this. That is a dangerous, risky, dumb thing to do.
Yeah, the reserves is definitely a small part. That's about $150 million of overall about $600 million that the council added back into the budget. So you're right. The CFO does not like this. We will see how much he tries to go to the mat to stop this. But the larger amount, this 450-ish million or so, comes from the tax changes that we've also been hearing a lot about, right? This is the city trying to decouple its tax code from the federal cuts included in the One Big Beautiful Bill, the big Trump tax cut. You remember Congress tried to stop DC from doing this. You know, they were outraged that they weren't going to be giving them tax breaks on tips and tax breaks for seniors, that sort of thing. But the city was already collecting that revenue for the 2025 tax year when Congress swooped in and did this. So through basically making some legal arguments, they've said, we think we can keep all the money we've already collected. We'll do a few decouplings, moving forward. Hopefully Congress doesn't notice and doesn't care all that much, but leave some of the big ones in place, like the taxes on tips, tax break. So the idea is we do this for 1 year. We hope Congress doesn't notice or get too mad about it. We get to solve these problems for a year, and then what happens? We don't really know a problem for the next mayor and council.
So, Emma, what does happen? I mean, you had Mendelson saying what he thought was pretty inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, Mendelson said basically that he thinks it's very likely that there is a tax hike next year. The mood was very odd at times because I think people were relieved and happy, and a lot of the council members were saying they were proud and thankful of kind of avoiding how drastic this budget was going to be. But then a lot of council members would come and refer to next year as, I think Councilmember Zachary Parker called it a buzzsaw and a cliff. And like there just was this looming idea of like, as Alex said, this was one big punt. This is not a long time sustainable fix to the DC area's revenue woes. So it seems like next year there's going to be a tax increase. But what Mendelson has said repeatedly is that in the fall, he wants to hold a public hearing about ideas of ways to raise revenue. And so I think that that's kind of his way of being like, we want to have some more public conversation, even if we do have to raise the tax before being forced to do that. And I mean, there are still proposals out there that would potentially raise taxes. There's Councilmember Nadeau's proposal on like capital gains of people past a certain threshold of income that they could vote on again before this final budget vote on June 23rd. But a lot of council members have expressed a real hesitancy to raise the tax in a year where so many in the city have lost their jobs. That doesn't mean that they're going to be opposed to raising taxes forever.
So I wrote a little bit about Councilmember Nadeau's proposal, which initially was that everybody who makes in salary more than $200,000 for a single person or $250,000 for a married couple would have a new tax on their quote unquote passive income. That is like investment stuff. A lot of people were like, $250,000 for a couple, that you could get like 2 senior DCPS teachers would potentially qualify for that. Like, is that really what we're calling a wealth tax? Is that rich? And there's been this sort of conversation about like, what does constitute rich? Now they're saying actually maybe $500,000 for a couple. And that question is like a pretty divisive and interesting one, but so is the sort of basic question of whether a city that is, where the main industry of the city is like contracting and may never come back in the same way it was. And therefore the city needs to find new ways, like new businesses to employ our people and or new ways of enticing people to stay in a place where the main industry is contracting. And so there's an argument that like, and against that backdrop, it is really bad to raise taxes because that is a disincentive for these, new employers of laid off people to come. What's the argument in favor of these? Like what people who are in favor of or think it's inevitable that we will raise taxes, what did they say in response to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of Nadeau and her supporters' argument is that you're right, this could affect people who would ordinarily be viewed as, if not middle class, but not sort of the wealthy per se. They've bumped up the income threshold, sensing some of that pushback. And I think sensing that they could make that change without losing a ton of revenue, just because, let's face it, where are the biggest capital gains? They're not from your average pair of teachers. They're from people who are at the higher income brackets. So their argument is, look, a lot of these people just got some of the biggest tax breaks ever, thanks to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act at the federal level. So, they are already getting a tax break. We could essentially raise local taxes that would not really affect them all that much. It's not quite a one-for-one. It affects some of the different areas, but the essential idea being, and I think Charles Allen has spoken about this even from a personal standpoint. I've heard from people at meetings with him where he said, my family just got a huge tax break. We're not being asked to do more. I think that we could. And so I think that argument can sway people. But here's the thing. I think they've got about 5 votes for this right now. You need to get to 7. I don't really see how that happens between now and June 23rd. The question is whether they can, rally support, especially with a primary coming up. Robert White and Janice Lewis George, two people that the progressives absolutely have to have voting for this if they want it to pass. I don't know if they're really excited about the idea of doing that a few days before an election. And so, does the political calculus change afterward? Maybe, but you still got to win over a few people a little more in the middle. And that's where I think they're really counting on those hearings Emma referred to, that they want to try and build consensus and then present this plan to the next mayor and say, hey, here are kind of your options. What do you want to do as you build your new budget? I think that's where I'm getting the sense that people kind of want to wait and forestall this debate until things are a little less heated and a little more certain about who the next mayor will be.
Right. Even if it's on the wealthy, it's tough to make raising taxes as part of your closing argument compelling when you're running for office. It's tough to have that be one of the final things you do before you ask people to vote for you.
I guess, Alex, what I meant to ask was, like, you've basically said a lot of people talking about why it's only fair, given the federal tax cuts, that rich people be asked to pay more to the district. But the argument against is less of a moral one than this city is in a lot of economic danger through no fault of its own, because the major industry, the major employer of people, is fundamentally changing. And in that moment, the city needs to do extraordinary things to either attract new employers or retain people who might think this is a moment to leave. And that moment makes it a bad time to do new taxes, even if the new taxes are sort of morally fair. Is anybody dealing with that argument?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think that they're all sensitive to the financial, political climate that they find themselves in. I think the argument that you would probably hear in response is simply that, by and large, arguments about tax flight, the research really doesn't bear out that it happens. I think that the changes that they would rather pursue to bring businesses in would be regulatory ones that you hear the candidates talking about, making it easier to do business in DC, making it easier to build housing in DC, in particular, an emphasis for both major mayoral candidates. So I think that they're sensitive to it, but the way that they look at it is, if they can craft a tax hike, whether it be the one that we've been discussing, which is this, net wealth income, tax, or other ones like a pied-à-terre tax, to bust out my French, on second homes. These are people who fundamentally will be in the city no matter what, and in their view have been undertaxed through the duration. This isn't something necessarily that's going to scare away a business from investing. They're hoping to sort of be offering a, sort of carrot to new businesses on the one hand, while the stick for the residents that they think aren't going anywhere on the other.
So you mentioned that this use of reserves, or rainy day fund, is like about a quarter of the money that the council found in order to undo some of these cuts. That's like $150 million. The chief financial officer of the city, watchdog of the city's budget, says this is a really bad idea. What you said, I think, reflects a lot of the response I hear, which is members of the council saying, oh, it's only a quarter of the money we found. But that doesn't really address the idea doesn't really address the question of whether using money from your rainy day fund is a good idea. It sounds to me like a bad idea, but I don't, know anything about this. What is their argument? What is the argument for why it's a good thing to do?
Yeah, I think fundamentally this gets into a very nerdy disagreement between the council and the CFO on exactly how much you need in those reserves. The CFO's position is, taking any money out of these reserves sends a bad message to the bond markets, who, make it easier or harder for the city to borrow money, which have already looked at what Congress has done to the city's budget and raised alarm bells. He's saying this would destabilize, this already fragile climate. But the council's argument is, look, it's not as if we're back in the days of the 1990s where we have virtually no cash on hand. They're not only meeting the target that they've set for themselves as they were coming out of those dark days of the 90s of keeping 60 days worth of cash on hand, they've had even more than that, about 66 days. So if nothing goes, no other money comes in, they've got money to run the government for 66 days. Taking this money out would get them to 62 days. So still a lot, still above generally, well-regarded financial standards. And the CFO quibbles with this. He thinks it needs to be higher. But they're saying, look, if this is not an emergency, with all the things that have been happening to the city's economy, what is? What then is the purpose of the reserve fund? If we're still being responsible, right, it's a rainy day fund. But, that is not a sustainable answer forever. You can hope that excess revenues come in above projections and put it back into the reserves, which is their plan to kind of placate the CFO and say, look, don't worry, more money comes in, we won't spend it, we'll put it back in. But you can't plan on that forever, especially because the CFO is saying, look, our tax revenues are not growing the way that they used to. That used to be the answer to all the city's problems, right? Take money out of the reserves, put it right back in. Can't count on that in the same way. And as I said, the CFO has the power to really throw a fit about this if he wants to, draw in attention from Congress if he wants to. It is not clear to me yet whether he will.
Don't miss Folger Theater's How Shakespeare Saved My Life, playing June 9th through July 5th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. In this rolling world premiere, Broadway star Jacob Ming Trent creates a one-man comedy that one critic proclaims Shakespeare would have loved. Born with a gift for poetry but rejected as unfit to play the part of the poet, Ming Trent invites us to take a deep dive into the crevices of his youth. Calling on the bard and a host of genius rappers, half-crazed preachers, and soulful poets, he takes us on a propulsive ride that reaffirms the power of language and music. It's in DC for a limited time only. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by phone at 202-544-7077. Get yours today. There was a really interesting piece in Greater Washington this week that kind of reviewed the makeover of Logan Circle, which is one of the National Park Service properties in D.C. that the Trump administration has sort of spiffed up and cleaned up and so on. And like a lot of Washingtonians, the author was like, it's really nice that the statues are cleaned up and the grass is redone. Also said, it's kind of a missed opportunity. Would have really liked to see a restroom put in. Would have really liked to see some bollards to avoid car crashes. Would have really liked to see some kind of acknowledgement that a lot of people around here use the park for their dogs. And it struck me as interesting, one, because it was like really a very apolitical piece. That, it wasn't, Trump bad or Trump good or Trump is running us down by claiming that we are responsible for the deterioration of this Park Service property, blah, blah, blah. Just a sort of what would we like from our park? And I feel like that's like a conversation it's almost like vanished in the heat of like anger and passion over Trump's monumental proposals that because of a weird kind of accident of history in DC, the National Park Service, which is built for like Yellowstone and the Lincoln Memorial and these sort of grand, historic artifacts that must be maintained, is not really built for like, ball fields and bathrooms and stuff that people want from their neighborhood park. And like there was a time when people would complain about that, not usually with much effect because the Park Service doesn't really answer to them. But it's like that conversation sort of vanished for the last 6 months as a result of the Make It Beautiful efforts. And I was very happy, like heartened to see it back because I think the parks in DC, there's so many of them and they're so pretty, but they're also like, they're run by people who you can't vote out of office.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought the Greater Washington angle of, this is more than a traffic circle with a monument. This is a community meeting place was really interesting because, NPS has been treating a lot of these parks. So they are restoring, for instance, the Malcolm X Park. Like the fountains back on. But I think that a lot of the focus has been on the statues and the grass, and people are like, this is where we have our drum circle. This is where we do book club. This is where we park. This is where we walk our dogs. And so I thought it was interesting to see an article focusing on the utility of the park for the community. I don't know where they'd put a public restroom in Logan Circle. It's big, but it's not that big. But I thought the idea about balustrades or something around the circle to prevent cars from crashing through it was actually very smart and totally seems like something that could actually be in the National Park Service's purview. I mean, I feel like every year that I've been here, there's been some picture go viral on Twitter of a car that crashed through the park and hit a bench or hit the monument or hit something. And so I feel like that could be reasonably explained as part of preservation efforts for the circle.
I mean, there was a big, like, ridiculous controversy, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, where there had been an LGBT bocce ball league that played in Logan Circle. And this violated Park Service rules, about organized sports and how they must be regulated. And, those rules, again, are written for, like, the assumption that, like, these are historic, hallowed pieces of land that must be unmolested. And I get that. That should apply to a lot of, like, I wouldn't want somebody to be, like, playing kickball at Mount Rushmore, But it's just sort of fundamentally not what a neighborhood, in a dense urban city. The reason cities built parks in the first place was people didn't really have anywhere to go and they'd get fresh air. And so this was there's inevitably in DC, no matter whether it's like a Democratic president who DC loves or a Republican one that they hate or whatever, there are these, like, kind of silly fights with Park Service and the taxpayers of the USA probably shouldn't have to be dealing with.
Yes, I mean, never forget that all of this that we've learned through subsequent reporting is coming out of NPS, fees that people are paying at parks around the country to make our parks nicer. So, thanks, Mount Rushmore tourists or whatever. But you're absolutely right that these fights will continue for as long as NPS controls the park. It gets heightened now because it's Trump and his feelings toward DC are well known. But I mean, think of how long this has been going on, where even people in their neighborhoods discover that, like, a tiny little pocket park happens to be federal land and they can't get it improved or just get the trash cleaned up out of it, something that the NPS has been horrible at for decades now. So we see it in the macro level with something as, big, as important as Logan Circle, but, even at the micro level, it ends up being these problems. And so you see basic things like DC is trying to build new public bathrooms. You've seen the throne bathrooms, something like that could work perfectly at Logan Circle, as the article points out. And instead we don't get it. But, instead we do, for at least for a time until someone defaces it, get a big photo of the president on top of it.
So Eleanor Holmes Norton, the DC delegate in Congress, introduced a bill that would rename Rock Creek Park as Rock Creek National Park. And she says this is, to highlight its historic significance, et cetera. There may also be, like, a little bit of subtle gamesmanship there that, like, maybe they will be better at, like, fixing up some of the roadways or clearing the trash or whatever.
AKA, stop calling me constituents. I can't do anything about it.
if people know who to blame, right? But I am sort of like, my view is, like, maybe they should do the precise opposite and like transfer the park to the city, which would cost us, but ultimately it's just better if, like, the people you vote for, you can be mad at about the state of the park you actually use for your, like, picnics and bocce ball and so on.
Yeah, I mean, this all kind of ties into the statehood conversation, or at least the, like, taking incremental steps toward it, right? A lot of people have argued, like, the more DC is able to make these incremental changes, so, like, taking back control of the parkland, taking back control of its courts, like, these things that we, take for granted. Of course, that's just the feds. The argument is, why press for full statehood right away when that's a really hard lift? You need to be kind of building DC's capacity to do this I think that's a really good example. It would come with a lot of expense, right? All of a sudden you added, a bunch of new parks to maintain, and there's plenty of complaints about how DC does that job right now, but it sort of builds those muscles. It makes those arguments, and something that perhaps the next delegate will need to consider, knowing that they can't wave a magic wand and make DC a state. What can you do to give DC more autonomy? That's one of those things.
And you could pitch it as a budget thing. Like, why should Emma's parents in Indiana be paying taxes to like support the place where like, my kids play kickball?
Exactly. If people
I think
knew,
my parents in Indiana would get behind that.
Yeah. I mean, if people knew in any way, yeah, but they just don't. I mean, no one thinks about it.
Okay, Emma, you have been collecting invitations for election night watch parties. It's a long American tradition this year with a twist, because these watch parties will happen, but we probably won't find out who the victor is. So you'll just watch some results come in that don't really tell you who won. But they're also picking locations, which I think is really interesting. It like mixes like what kind of symbolism you want to have, what kind of labor situation the venue has, whether there's a room available, and all kinds of practical and symbolic things. What can we learn from our various citywide or board candidates?
Right. This has become a little bit of like a delightful fixation for me in the lead up to the election. It started with an invite or two, but then I just started kind of collecting where people are going. And I've just been tweeting them out like as I find them. And people's responses are so interesting. Like I'll say, Rini Sempath is going to be at Dacha Shah, and the responses will be like, that tells you everything you need to know, or like, that makes so much sense. It's really interesting how much meaning people are assigning to like the places that these candidates choose. I'm kind of obsessed because I think it's going to be very like anticlimactic and like at worst awkward, because I mean, at their like end of the night speeches, some of these candidates may not know if they're celebrating or conceding. I'll go through a couple now, but people have started like messaging me, like telling me like where they would host their election party if they were a candidate. And it's been kind of a fun place. And we know how politicians work. Like we know that this was a conversation about who owns these places and what do they signal and who are the clientele and are they unionized and things like that. So we have Kenya McDuffie at the park at 14th, which kind of made me chuckle when I found out about it because I used to work right over there. And yeah.
So can you explain the cultural like import of the park at 14th?
Right. It's like a nightclub, but I mainly know it because I see all over social media. It's like famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, for like these extremely boozy, bottomless brunches. The man who owns it, Mark Barnes, goes viral on like TikTok all the time because he does not play about the dress code. He's out in line. He's sending people home. A bunch of celebrities go there when they come visit. Like some of the Real Housewives go there. And yeah, Mark has previously owned Love and like has been in the nightclub business for over 30 years in DC. And it's a place where I would say, especially a lot of DC's Black community, like they go for brunch, they go to hang out, but it's known to be kind of like a wild like party place, which is not the persona that I've gotten from Kenya McDuffie when I've spoken to him. So it's interesting.
Well, you would think so, but in 2022, he also did his victory party at the park at 14th. Truly one of the sweatiest experiences I have ever had because so many people get packed into it. It was such a hot night. I remember being in line trying to talk to him with your former colleague, Michael Bryce Sadler, and I think we sweat about a gallon as we were doing that. And I would say big favorite among the DC political establishment. There have been, I think, Mayor Muriel Bowser birthday parties there. Her very close confidant, Brandon Todd, have had many. I think he even had one there this year or the year before, including one that was disrupted very memorably by climate activists because he's a Washington gas lobbyist. So the park at 14th, when I saw McDuffie pick that, I was like, yes, of course. where else would it be? I was telling my photographer, I really got to hope that we find a way to get better photo sight lines because it's so dark. It's a club, as you say. So if we're trying to get photos of this guy, for some sort of victory speech, it's going to be a nightmare. But I hope that they all have a very good time.
Emma, what were some of the others that jumped out at you?
Well, something that I saw on Twitter, X, whatever you're going to call it, that made me laugh is that right across Franklin Park from the park at 14th is the Eaton Hotel, and Brooke Pinto is going to be hosting her party at Wild Days on the rooftop of the Eaton Hotel. And so people were joking. They're like, I'm ready for some drunken McDuffie and Pinto staffers to run into each other in the middle of Franklin Square. So I thought that was funny. Janice is at Howard Theater, which is where she launched her campaign. I think most people expected that. It's a historic theater. It can fit a lot of people. Similarly, I didn't know that Mayor Bowser had hosted a birthday party at the park of 14th, but I do know that Mayor Bowser has hosted campaign celebration, campaign watch parties at the Howard Theater. So that felt like a go-to.
By some very close Bowser confidants. I mean, they were instrumental in kind of like getting that project off the ground. Because remember, they had to redo that Howard Theater. Some bigwig developer types involved in Howard Theater. So not necessarily a natural fit for the Democratic Socialist in the race. But they seem to have taken a shine to it after they packed it for their sort of launch party. And speaking as someone who lives around the corner, disrupted our parking. So we're really looking forward to that again.
Yeah. And then for me, like when people were saying, where would you host? I was thinking Franklin Hall, because that's where I go to watch football games, college football. It's big. I love the buffalo chicken wrap. And then I found out that Aparna Raj in Ward 1 is hosting her watch party at Franklin Hall. So kudos. That would have been my.
Is that on brand? She's a very progressive, like Democratic Socialists of America, left-wing candidate. Does Franklin Hall like dovetail with that or not, or is it just a nice place?
I think it's just a large space. I mean, yeah. I normally go for trivia or college football, and so I wouldn't say the crowd's like super Democratic Socialist, but you never know in DC. Truly,
socialists can play football too.
Yeah, that's right. They're owned by another big restaurant operator in the city, and that was where Bowser did her 2022 victory celebration in the primary. But yes, as you say, you're just kind of looking at some point, you got to throw the ideology a little to the side because it's like, I think we're going to have a lot of people, and this is centrally located on the 14th Street corridor. So.
I mean, I was struck in your list, Kinney Zalesny, who's a former Microsoft executive and Clinton administration official without a lot of DC like local politics background, but who makes an argument that sort of this kind of different CV is maybe what it takes to be the DC congressional delegate. She's doing hers at Barcelona Wine Bar in Cathedral Heights, which is, it's Cathedral Heights and Barcelona Wine Bar, and it's not going to do much to burnish your like woman of the people credentials.
No, and I love me some sangria from Barcelona Wine Bar, but it is a chain, and I feel like other people have tried to avoid the chain of it all. And if you're going to do Barcelona Wine Bar, my thought is try the 14th Street one. They have a new room upstairs that you can rent for private events.
Yeah, the advice I always give to candidates when they're asking is pick something centrally located because reporters may be scrambling around trying to get there in the event that you win. And if you pick something that is in the far reaches of upper Northwest, it is going to be that much more difficult for us to do it. So kudos to those of you who are putting them all downtown, right in the middle of the city, next to a metro, easy for us to zip around to fast on election night. But every year there's a few that choose to do that anyway. I guess we'll see whether we need to rush up to Cathedral Heights or not.
Alex Coma, election night consultant.
Hey, I don't know much, but I do know staking out election victory parties, a tradition, as you say, that may look different this year. I think that some candidates are thinking through, like, what percentage of the vote do I need to be at to come out and give a speech that says, I feel confident that we are going to win. I can tell you this is a conversation that campaigns are having right now because all of us reporters are asking, and they need to know what to message to their supporters. Some of whom may be wondering, like, what the heck's going on?
What a disaster in waiting this is.
I'm excited.
Could be.
All right, before we go, I want to give a big thank you to all of our CityCast neighbors. Thank you all for your support. Today, paid subscribers, that is to say, our CityCast DC neighbors, get a bonus fourth roundup chat. We're going to talk about the potential homeless shelter in the old HUD building. If you want to be sure you always get the full episode, become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month. Members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Annie Reese, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, and Josh Patton. Our newsletter writers are Emma Uber, Kayla Cote-Stammerman, and me, Michael Schaefer. Our hosts are Bridget Todd, and also me, Michael Schaefer. Music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from Rue Walker from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoyed the show, tell everyone about it at whatever watch party you go to. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.